One more session before we take a short coffee break. The CISO Imperative, Quantifying NHI and Agentic AI Risk for the board. A real pleasure to have some of the best known CISOs in the industry that have worked in Fortune 100, 500 organizations. So I welcome to the stage Ross Sherman, who's going to moderate, Rennie Gutman, and Troy Wilkinson.
Good morning. All right. I was a little nervous that we were the only thing between y'all and lunch, but there's still some energy in the room, so I can appreciate that. And thank you very much for the warm intro. All right. Some prepared remarks here. So I'm Ross Sherman, and I'm the Senior Director of Global Agentic AI for SailPoint, and we're about to lead the most exciting 30 minutes of your next week. So, yeah, I was expecting some smiles, some claps there, but all right. All right. Well, we're sitting at an inflection point. For 2 decades, identity risk was knowable. Humans with named accounts, clear text credentials, and access logs. But the attack surface is now machine-driven. Agentic AI systems operating with autonomy, no named user, and no traditional forensic trail. Most boards don't yet understand this shift, and yet many CISOs who are waiting for a breach, audit finding, or regulatory pressure to educate them are already behind. So to dig into how CISOs translate an invisible threat into boardroom credibility and capital allocation, I have 2 amazing leaders here with me. And so to that end, I'll hand it over to them for some intros, and we'll start with you, Renee.
Good morning. My name is Renee Gutman, and I'm going to claim elder statesman here. So I've been in security for over 30 years, 1994 to be exact. I was one of the first Gartner analysts in 1998, and in 1999, I helped architect the first online access system for Capital One for folks to get access to their financial statements, if you can imagine, a time when that didn't exist. I then went on to Time Inc. and Time Warner. I was the CISO there. I became the first global CISO of Coca-Cola in 2011. I then went on to build a security consulting practice with a pretty well-known, global company. And then I was recruited to Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines, great benefits, to be their first CISO. And then I was recruited up to Campbell's to address manufacturing security, so a lot of IoT, ICS stuff. And then in 2022, I decided that I would follow my husband, finally. He was following me all around. And we went to Florida, and I'm semi-retired. I work with a lot of startups, but I also do mentoring and, try to help pave the way for the future. And yes, I've had some board experience along the way.
Just a little. Over to you, Troy.
It's hard to follow that. They call Renee the godmother of cybersecurity, and I believe it. She's been a long-time friend. I appreciate her friendship all these years. But, for myself, I'm a multi-time CISO. My last company was Interpublic Group, which inspired the show Mad Men with Don Draper. Think about a Madison Avenue advertising firm, which was pretty interesting to work there for 5 years as their global CISO. And then before that in healthcare and legal tech. Started in law enforcement, though. My greatest achievements were really help building forensics labs around the globe for the U.S. government. That was, a very rewarding task. Right now, I work in the venture capital space, and my whole goal in life is to connect innovators and entrepreneurs to buyers who are looking for unique solutions in the world. We're talking about agentic AI. It's a problem that didn't exist 2 to 3 years ago, so we're solving it with technology that didn't exist 2 to 3 years ago. Very interesting ecosystem, and I do that through the venture world, bringing venture capital to the founders to help fund the companies that are making a difference in solving the problems that the CISOs have. So that's my goal today.
Rock on. Thanks, guys. So what ties these 2 amazing and accomplished humans together? Renee and Troy have both translated technical risk into boardroom conversations at Fortune 500 scale. They both understand that governance, not tools alone, is what changes boards' behavior. And both are thinking hard about risk that didn't exist 5 years ago. So let's dive in. Start with you, Troy. Let's start with why NHI and agentic AI risk is so hard to service. What's the fundamental difference between explaining a data breach, something boards understand instantly, and explaining the emergence of an attack surface they can't see, touch, or measure?
Yeah, it's a great question, and for the folks in this room, they understand NHI. I know when I was a CISO 10 years ago, that was probably my biggest concern, the lack of visibility into service accounts and we didn't even have API tokens at that time, at least not where I worked. It was all kind of castle and moat. But we still had machine accounts, machine identities, and servers connecting to servers and developers connecting to databases. And those ephemeral accounts were hard to see, hard to secure. And so I was really excited when NHI came out. The first companies that came in this space, I thought this was like bringing fire to cavemen. It was great. And now we are looking at this explosion of agentic AI, and our workforces are exploding by the tens of thousands to millions of new users that we cannot see, control, or feel. So how do you translate that into your board and get them excited about investing in solutions? That's the question. And I would say that every Fortune 500 board is different, and I'm sure everybody here has a different leadership structure, whether your board is a public board or a private board. They are all different. And I mean the personalities on the people on your board, the makeup, the consistency. So they're going to ask for different things. But the consistent thing I've seen across the boards I've worked with is they ask for consistency and communication that is not technical. They're looking for fiduciary responsibility, meaning risk to the business if they don't act. And so the best way to educate the board is to inform the board. So bringing this up in metrics and showing them on a graph, what our risk is, and actually putting dollars to risk using the FAIR model, which is our modeling scenario, and saying if we don't fix this risk, it's going to cost us this much money if we have a breach in that area. And then it's going to cost us X dollars to fix that risk. So is it worth that, or is there a mitigating control? Can we transfer that risk? There was a lot of things. As a CISO, I'm just a risk informer. I'm a risk executive. I don't make that decision whether or not to accept the risk or transfer the risk. The board does, the leadership does. And so as you saw with Joe Sullivan, there was a little bit of a question about who owned that risk that day. We understand now through the SEC and others that the board and the CEO own that risk, but the CISO has to be the informer. General counsel has to be aware of it. They have to do all this new 8K and 10K for the stuff. So going back to my point, the board is hungry, and they hear buzzwords, right? They hear buzzwords about agentic AI and identity, and so we just have to educate them through informing them. And what I have seen has been very positive since the term AI came out. We've seen a lot of investment wherever we need it. You can go in there and say, I need a pink unicorn to solve this agentic AI problem. They'd probably fund it. So right now, that's a good thing for us, but it's going to turn as we get fatigue of all this solutions. So I just ask that, if you're going to go in there, make sure you have a good relationship with each person, and you make sure your message can be absorbed by the technical and the non-technical board member alike, and that they support your strategy.
Right on. Yeah, I keep thinking back to walking into boardrooms telling them I needed money for digital transformation. Like, that sounds good. Now it's, hey, I need some money for agentic AI. They're like, ooh, that sounds good. But anyhow, Renee, you're back in a board meeting. The CFO asks you, what's our material risk here? Give me a number, not a possibility, rather a probability, and tell me what we're exposed to if we don't act. How do you answer that when we don't have mature forensics and when attacks are still mostly theoretical?
All right, so let's start with what we do know. All right, so what we do know is that identities have always been, a target. That's why we say things like, why do I need to hack in when I can log in, right? And we also can, look around and we can say, well, there's a lot of these non-human identities out there, and maybe they even outnumber, human identities, depending on where you're looking, by 144 to 1. So there's a lot of them, right, that potentially are targeted, could be targeted, right? And then I think the other thing, and I've read this, and who knows if I can believe everything that I read on the internet, but some stat that says 80% of attacks against identity are actually attacks that have leveraged non-human identities. So let's assume that could be true. So what else is true? We know that we basically got programs, and we've got a lot of people in our organizations typically that are trying to leverage AI, right? From people that have been trained, to use it, and then people that have, found it, discovered it, and they're in the business units, and wow, let me go and do something and try this out. And they may or may not have had a lot of, security training. They may, think an 8-character password's okay for anything you want to do, right? And so what else is factual potentially? Well, let's assume that the CSA, the Cloud Security Alliance, who did a study in January of this year, and there was an online study, and they surveyed, they got responses from 228 organizations. And those organizations from around the globe of various sizes said that 68% of organizations can't differentiate or can't distinguish an action, whether it was taken by a human, an AI action, or an agentic AI. So now I've got things like 31% of AI agents are operating human credentials. So those are things, right, in terms of probability. So I've got an attack surface that people have been attacking, okay? And it's growing exponentially. So that part is probably quite true. We're not going to argue that one. And then the other thing, and attacks have happened, okay, and I'm not going to name them, but apparently there are several attacks that have been attributable already to non-human identity failures. So, Mr. CFO, things have happened. There have been bad days for non-human identity. The other thing that I would say is that, in terms of impact, all right, so we know that things are happening. What are the consequences, if something goes south here? Well, the consequences are that, frankly, are going to be dependent a little bit on what the AI or the thing is used for, right? So if it's being used or deployed in a medical environment, that might be different than, although I really do want this to happen, I actually want to call my favorite airline and ask for my flight status. And then I want to ask it to refund my ticket, okay? I really do. I want to see if I can get away with that. So that might be a bit of a monetary risk, but maybe not in the grand scheme of things, a big impact. But I do think there is a problem, all right, with not doing anything at this point, given the fact that, we can already prove that attacks have happened as an attack surface. So I do want to point you to a resource, and this is probably the Save My Bacon resource for the entire time that this thing has been around, which is almost, I think, 12 or 13 years. So it's the National Association of Corporate Directors Cyber Risk Oversight document. Who's familiar with it? Who's seen it? Who's followed it through its 5 iterations from 20 pages to close to 100? All right, y'all better love me after this one. So seriously, it's free. You can come and find me, all right? It is a document. It's actually part of information that is prepared for board members. And there's over 20,000 board members, probably 25,000 members of boards who are part of the NACD. And they train you on everything from, succession planning. I mean, it's not just cyber, but they have cybersecurity and risk management courses. They have days of sessions. They even have certification courses. Well, they have just published their 5th edition, and it came out this year, all right? It's a cyber risk oversight document. It's nacdonline.org, and they have, they've got different sections, and then they have preparation questions. So these are the cheat sheets for the boards, all right? So in cheat sheet section E, discussion guide for board decisions on AI, all right? Whole section on it, 3 pages. 25 questions, and there's a question in there. How are we managing AI identity? Example, ensuring AI agents are only granted protected access to authorized data sources and nothing else. How is this tested for performance and security effectiveness? So, Mr. CFO, we're not asking about doing stuff that people haven't already thought about, including 25,000 of your peers. So if something happens now, depending on the impact, it's still a loss of goodwill that we're not able to read and keep up with what look, by the time this thing came out, what had already been 6 months, a year's worth of probably writing, right? And so, Mr. CFO, here's a document that basically says there's probably a great likelihood, we should be thinking about it, the impact could be huge, and we ought to be doing something.
I love it. Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just want to say that NACD has been a tremendous resource for folks in our position, but across, it's a common language for executives, CEOs, CFOs, and CISOs understand that this is a platform that translates that language into a common language. Sometimes, CISOs are viewed as the IT guy, where the CEO doesn't understand tech, so he'll say, just go give that to the IT guy or the security guy. When you talk to them from the NACD level, you're talking their language, and they start seeing you as part of their inner circle rather than an outsider who doesn't know what he's talking about. So, good point, Renee.
I love it. So, Renee, you've made your case to the board, but they still decide to defer. Why does waiting cost more than acting now?
So it's the why now problem, right? I like it, but why now, and what are my peers doing? So the why now, again, it's the proliferation, and the time to do something is, before we basically embedded all this stuff into all of our mission critical systems, right? So it's trying to implement, something while it's still manageable. The other thing that I would say is that, again, depending on what you read or hear, if 80% of projects are actually failing, they're not delivering the outcomes that they've set out to do when, the AI initiative started, this is the time for experimentation. So I would say, look, this is when we should be learning, right? As opposed to being like the poster child for some form of, attack. There's also a cost of not acting, okay? And again, the same CSA document, which I would encourage people to get. I mean, it's pretty new if you consider, 6 months, still pretty new. It talks about like what is the time that people actually spend, if you don't have a foundational or a set of guardrails in place to give people, for how they should be using for implementing identities within AI or within agents. I mean, there's a cost, right? Somebody's got to sit around, scratch their head, talk to somebody else, figure out what they're actually going to do. There's a cost, right? It could be 2 days, could be 10 days, again, depending on, the study. But there is a cost of not doing something. Never mind the cost if something goes south. But there's a cost. So, from a philosophy point of view, or philosophically, in my career, I've always believed in one thing. It's that put something out there, get people to agree on it. I'm not, get people to look at it, but get people to fundamentally agree on it. At least set a course, create a course strategy, create a set of standards of guidance, things like thou shalt not use human identity or thou shalt operate at, least privilege, but create something. And I would even suggest, and I don't know what's going to be behind the showroom floor doors, but I would suggest to you there's probably people out there that have built more foundational types of systems. Yes, they may be evolving, right? So's AI, shocker, right? And they may have things that might be useful in terms of building what they call this identity control plane, right? Point people to that, give people the foundation tools, not just for identity, but to do these permissions, right? We've talked about context. So go take a look at what some of those solutions are, because at the end of the day, even if you direct people to something, that's one course correction. You don't have to go chase everybody down, go figure out what they've done where they've done something good, bad, or ugly, and try to fix that. But if you can point people at something, right, and have them kind of agree to use that, and you can check to see if they use it, but then you've got you can evolve that, right? But you're not like wondering, what's everybody thinking, doing, and there's a cost associated with everybody thinking, scratching their heads. So I would say do something now. It's not going to be perfect, or it may not be perfect, but we better be doing something because, frankly, the NACD also suggests that we ought to be thinking something and testing it for security and effectiveness.
Yeah, board's indecision is still a decision nonetheless, and they ought to be subscribing to perfect being the enemy of done. And with that said, Troy, I'm wondering if you have anything to add before we get into the next question.
No, I think it's spot on with, we must act now. And as a CISO, I used to have a carve out in my budget. You can start with some of these newer companies as a design partner or some smaller investment so that you don't have to go to the board, get approval. So some CISOs have a signatory amount they can sign for. Get started, do something, do some experimentation, use an innovation lab in your identity team. It both helps protect you, but it also gets your guys excited about innovation, because they want it, they need it, they want to be playing with the newest toys and securing the business. So that's what I would do.
Perfect. So with regard to getting started, what's that first conversation that you're going to have with your identity and access teams? And because this is about understanding the agentic systems that are already in your environment, what they can access and what happens if they're compromised, how do you staff, tool, and sequence that?
Yeah, I think these are the same folks that would have been helping me design that strategy. So as I present it to my leadership and the board, it's going to be an entire strategy and roadmap and vision that we have agreed upon in the team. And usually you have folks who are excited about that, want you to get this approved or looking for that funding because they understand how important it is. But those folks are excited. How do you get the rest of the IT and tech team and the CTO, CIO excited? And the answer to that is just building bridges and really finding champions. We would go and find a security champion in every department, whether it's development or if it's IT or whatever it was, and we'd find those folks who are passionate about security, and we would enlist them to be our champions on that team, and they would be our voice. And our, in the meetings we weren't in, they were speaking highly of us and taking notes for us. And just really, I can't underscore enough the importance of relationships in security, because we hold a lot of the risk for securing the business, but we don't always have the ability to push the button to patch the systems or to fix things. So you have to lead by influence in some cases, and that's what I would do. So as far as the strategy, every company is different, but we're all facing the same things now. It's agentic AI, identity, security problems. Are we using human identities for our agents? Are we registering those agents so that we know who's responsible for what that agent did? Can we tell the difference in the logs from an action that was done by a human or an action done by that human's agent? These are all increasingly important questions that we're asking, because when the agent does something wrong, you can't just point and say, that's his fault, I didn't do that. But we already see that. So, and then as you look at building out your SaaS and your connectivity to your cloud, nobody here is all on premise. Nobody here is all in the cloud. We thought that was the dream many years ago, but nobody's there. It's all hybrid. So as we connect on-premise solutions to our cloud environments, are we protecting that connectivity? Are we connecting our SaaS? Do we know what our employees are using in the shadow AI world? How are we securing that? Are we identifying that? Are we discovering it and inventorying it? I mean, these things are huge challenges. So as you get that funding from the board, or the strategy that you've put in place for the roadmap and the vision, your team is going to be excited, and you just got to make sure you have the right milestones and benchmarks that you're judging yourself against, like Gartner, NACD, et cetera, so that you can measure success. Because right now the world is changing daily. And how do we continue to measure success in a world that's ever changing?
Love it. Renee, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that I'm sort of passionate about. So I've had identity for a long time, as a CISO, and I've had a love-hate with the thing forever, because if you get it wrong, everybody does hate you. I mean, they really do. And if you create too much friction and the users, and God forbid the CEO can't log in, then you're really in trouble, So I have found, and I hate to say this, that the identity teams have sort of been like sub-citizens in some organizations. They just haven't been given, I think, their rightful, place in the sun. And the first thing I would do is I would go and I would find people and I would call them engineers, and I would train them, to speak the language of the developers, and I would make sure they could have that conversation, right? That they weren't just going to be order takers, here, give me that thing so I can provision it and deprovision. That's not what this is anymore, right? So I would literally go and find myself some really smart engineers and architects, and I would want to take, and I know this because I've generally tried to kick identity out of people's organizations, like give it to operations, they can have it. I would want it now. As a CISO, I would want it because I think this is huge. This is so important. And now we're talking about things like context. I would want to own this as a key leader. I would want to be responsible for working with my key stakeholders and my peers to set the strategy for identity and to actually develop the requirements, and then to come up with the things that the bright lines that cannot be crossed, like we will operate with, least privilege. Oh, and what else we're going to do? We're going to log the things that those agents do so we can figure out what they did when we have to go back and, find out what happened here. We're not going to just let them show up, do something, and then nobody knows what the thing had access to. So I would want to create, and I heard this at the first session, right? Sort of what are those accountability things, like who's responsible for something. I would want to work that out across the organization. And then I think, honestly, discovery, I talked to an auditor at a company that I used to work for. I said, what are you doing these days? And he goes, oh, I'm doing an NHI audit. And I went, oh, really? And he goes, I said, what's the CISO think about that? He goes, oh, he doesn't know. So, I think I would literally go and find out what maybe auditors are learning too, because frankly, they're getting educated, and I would want to make sure I was one step in step with them, or ahead of them, or whatever you want to call it, but I would definitely not want to be behind them. And, discovery is table stakes. Finding these agents, whether you've built them, whether they're running in a SaaS, discovery is table stakes at this point. So I would definitely not want to be doing too much more without actually knowing where these the agents, who owns them, what they're connected to, what those little ecosystems look like. So I would definitely want to know what I've already got, and I think that the tools are out there, so it's actually a really bad thing if you actually have to admit that you don't know what you have, because those tools are out there and they're table stakes, and auditors actually fully expect you to know that. I'd be looking around for now what comes next, but I would, have my engineers working with my key stakeholders and putting together a set of requirements, including the fact that, we're going to build a foundation that we're all going to, apply to, and we're going to evolve it as things come along and make us more informed. And that's what I would be doing once I had all my money.
Love it. And I do think you're both spot on. The boards that move first aren't moving because they're risk averse. They're moving because CISOs have figured out how to translate an invisible threat into visible accountability gap. And the rest of the industry is still working on that translation. And with that said, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention SailPoint's new discovery trial. Yes, it's a plug. It's an incredible opportunity to bring your organization's potential agent sprawl into the light, and you can request your free trial today at sailpoint.com/discovery-tool. I got one guy smiling and laughing. Good. And before we wrap, I want to give a round of applause to our host, Mr. NHI. Quick round of applause. Godmother of security, Renee. And Troy. Thanks, gang.
You didn't say the godfather of NHI. Look, while you're here, I do want to ask a question, all three of you. Who owns AI within an organization, right? Is it the CISO? Should it be a new chief AI officer? What are your thoughts on that?
I can start if you'd like. Yeah. I see it as a shared responsibility. I actually come as a former practitioner. I led product development, software engineering, and user experience at a multinational Fortune 500 company before coming to SailPoint. And oftentimes I would get asked, hey, are you the organization's chief AI officer? And I would constantly tell folks, it's not really a title. The folks and the companies that have championed it as a title or made it a named officer don't understand it's a responsibility that we all share. It's a responsibility to our organization, all the constituents within it, and our customers. And to that end, really, the chief AI officer role that each of us own, our responsibility is to showcase that we can actually generate a material ROI off of AI and also bake compliance and risk into our programs respectively. So don't think about it as an afterthought, as so many SDLCs did, having to come back and subsequently patch the security nightmares that the organization, or rather that the engineers had opened across the organization. But think about how you bake audit, risk, compliance into your ADLC at the forefront, and to that end, make it a shared responsibility.
Yeah, so what I've seen work the best is a governance committee of AI that's got stakeholders from each part of the department, and whoever the leader is, usually it's the CIO, reports into the audit committee of the board. And as everybody has their own stake in that fight, from the outgoing, how do we use AI to be more competitive with our customers, and then how do we secure it, and then how do we provision it. There's so many stakeholders. That governance committee usually has the best outcome of an overall AI strategy rather than siloed, effort.
So I was listening to somebody, about what they were doing with NHI asking, and the guy just said, just stop. Like, just tell me what to do and I'll do it, So at the end of the day, as a CISO, I would want to be, accountable for saying, hey, we better be doing something now. And we need to assemble a team of people, but we need to set a direction, and we need to put in place a foundation. All right, we need to establish those standards. Like that's my job, is to make sure that those things occur. How we use AI, like whether we're going to use it for medical treatments, or whether we're going to use it to give refunds back to Renee when she asks for it, that might be an AI and a business leadership question. But I think that this is a time for security leaders, and with IT. I mean, quite often now security is IT, but to basically build that foundation and put it in place. And I have one more thing to say, and I really, I'll talk to everybody over there too. We have to stop admiring this problem. I honestly believe that we've come far enough, and we use words like identity control plane, and we use the foundation. Look, everything that went wrong with identity in the past, we know what those things are. We don't operate under least privilege. We don't log things. I mean, those things haven't changed, right? So we should be doing something now that's a little bit more meaningful, impactful, and just getting the ball rolling. And so stop wringing our hands, and basically we got to roll up our shirt sleeves and get going. And I'm very excited to see what's behind those doors when we open up the showroom floor. So, but I'd say get going, and thank you.
Great. Look, I think we may have time for maybe a couple of questions. I mean, to have had such honored guests here on this stage and not give the audience a chance to ask some questions. Anyone would like to ask honored guests anything?
That was SAILPONT.com / sorry.
NHIMG.org.
Plug.
NACDonline.org.
Any questions? Okay. All right, with that, we're going to just enter into a very short 5 to 10 minute
Thank you.
coffee break.